The opening scene features a Manhattan barbershop owned by an elderly man named Pop, who is currently discussing the New York Knicks and swearing. We are also introduced to Luke Cage, a strong black man who works as a janitor there. Not long after, a woman walks in and flirts with Luke, inviting him out for a coffee date. This leads to a quick scene between Luke and Pop because Pop is aware of Reva, Luke's deceased wife. Later, Pops and Luke have a private conversation when the elderly man tries to encourage Luke to move on with his life, dropping the line, "Always forward, never back." From their conversation, we learn that they're both ex-cons, and Pop is one of the only people who is aware of Luke's abilities. In addition to sweeping floors, Luke also has a second job at Harlem's Paradise, a slick nightclub that caters to the city's black elite. On his way there, he comes across his landlord named Connie, who also owns a Chinese restaurant. She asks for the rent, but he somehow manages to earn some more time. On this particular night, he's put on bartending duty because a coworker named Dante doesn't show up for his shift. Next, we're introduced to Cornell Stokes, the owner of Harlem's Paradise, who is discussing his growing powers with a woman named Mariah. A few moments later, he also strikes a deal with a guy named Domingo Colon, in which Cornell agrees to sell 10 cases of grade A level Justin Hammer-made guns for $100,000 each. However, the actual sale, which is taking place elsewhere, is ruined when 3 men in masks, Chico, Dante, and Shamik, storm in with guns blazing and kill everyone. Unexpectedly, Shamik also shoots Dante because Cornell would suspect an inside job. At Harlem's Paradise, Luke prepares a drink for a woman named Misty Knight, who's keeping an eye on Cornell. Shortly after, Luke is tasked with delivering champagne to Cornell's table. During this, the owner offers him a job if he's willing to carry a gun, but Luke declines. Back at the crime scene, Dante survives long enough to call Cornell's right-hand man, named Tone, ruining the club's celebratory mood. Outside the club, Luke runs into Misty again, and the two exchange flirtatious banter. Their amusing conversation leads them back to his place, where they end up making love. Later in his sleep, he dreams of being beaten in prison, and when he wakes up the following morning, Misty tells him about talking in his dreams, mentioning the names Shades and Comanche. Just then, she receives a call from work and prepares to leave. Before departing, Luke inquires about her profession, to which she lies that she's an auditor, but in reality, she happens to be a detective who's assigned to the investigation of a recent murder. Following this, she arrives at the crime scene, where a detective named Raphael Scarf is already on the case. While investigating, Raphael considers speaking with the bartender who filled in for Dante at the club. On the other hand, Cornell is attempting to smooth things over with Domingo to no avail. But the situation gets more intense when Shades Alvarez shows up. Shades appears to be Cornell's former colleague who now works for a powerful organization called Diamondback. He assures Cornell that it's not a takeover, that Diamondback wants him to succeed. Meanwhile, Pop is distraught because Dante was one of the kids who used to work for him and is now deceased. He is sure Shamik and Chico were with him as they were his boys as well. Elsewhere, Mariah is seen doing a press event to help Harlem Cornell when Shades arrives. Through their conversation, we learn that Mariah uses the federal and taxpayer money to fund Cornell's club. She's now demanding her money back, citing the possibility of an audit which could land her in jail. Cornell promises to return it to her. Later, they, who are aware of Shamik and Chico, locate Shamik and bring him to the club. Luke, who witnessed this, wants to help him, but is stopped when he spots Shades from Seagate Prison. Afterwards, Cornell starts questioning Shamik to find out where Chico is, but instead of answering, Shamik spits blood on him. Furious, Cornell then beats the kid to death with his bare hands. On the other hand, Luke looks freaked out because of Shades, but he manages to calm himself down by reasoning that Shades may not have noticed him. He then goes through a number of books, which leads to a flashback to his first meeting with Reva in prison. In the next scene, Mariah's thugs attempt to extort money from Connie and her husband. Shortly after, Luke steps in and initially warns the thugs. Unaware of his abilities, they take him lightly. One man throws a punch, and his bones shatter against Luke's face. Another person attempts to shoot him, but Luke deflects the bullet with his bare hand. After witnessing all of this, the remaining two run off in terror. Following the incident, Connie tries to hire Luke to protect them in case the thugs return, but he declines, stating that he's not for hire. Regardless, he assures the landlord, "I've got you." The next day at the barbershop, Pop, for one more time, tries to persuade Luke to use his power to help people. Pops gives him the rundown on Mariah's influence in the community and how she and Cornell are cousins. The elderly man is certain that Cornell will show up looking for Chico, and moments later, he does, along with Shades and Tone. The moment Cottonmouth sits in Pop's chair, an ominous tension unfurls. He asks for a straight razor shave, and every small movement is fraught with the possibility of violence. Shades takes a more direct approach to inquire about Chico's whereabouts, but Luke simply responds that folks come and go. With no information gathered, the gang is about to leave when Luke calls out Cornell for not paying for the shave. Tone turns around, casts a condescending look at Luke, and tosses a wad of bills at Pop. As they leave, Pop asks Luke to find Chico so that he can set up a parlay with Cornell. Luke tries to refuse him, but Pop reminds him that he's in debt and intends to collect. Misty visualizes the crime scene of the botched gun deal and realizes Shamik's murder was too violent and too personal for Chico. Later, she and Raphael roll up on a basketball court to interrogate Chico's whereabouts. When no one is willing to open up, she challenges one of the guys to a game of horse for the information. Meanwhile, Luke is also in the process of locating Chico, and during this, he notices Cornell going to visit Mariah. It appears that Cornell is there to deliver a portion of the money he had recovered from Shamik. However, it is insufficient, and as a result, tension develops between them. A few hours later, Luke finds Chico and expresses Pop's desire for him to return, but the boy refuses. Following this, Luke returns to Pop, who shares his past memory of how he used to be. It's revealed that he was given the nickname Pop because of the sound his fists made when he beat someone. Before going to jail, he used to run around the streets with Cornell and Chico's father, Fredo. After a while of talking, they walk inside, only to discover a teary-eyed Chico coming in from the back door. Just then, Turk, an untrustworthy-looking customer, notices Chico hiding in the back of the shop. It doesn't seem to be safe for Chico to stay there because Turk will immediately sell that intel. Soon after, Misty and Raphael visit Pop's shop to inquire about Chico, so Pop hides the boy inside the bathroom before approaching the detectives. Luke, who's shocked to see her, certainly makes no attempt to hide his animosity towards her. Pop effectively controls the situation by convincing the detectives that he knows nothing. As soon as they leave, Pop wants Luke to go see Cornell on his behalf because he works at the same club. Agreeing with him, Luke goes to Harlem's Paradise and gets Cornell to agree to a parlay before quitting his job there. At the same time, Tone receives a message from Turk informing him of Chico. The moment when Luke leaves, he tells Cornell about it, but he instructs him to let it go as he'll handle it in the morning. Despite this, Tone and Shades drive to Pop's shop, where Pop is cutting the hair of a kid, Lonnie. Luke reappears, and Chico walks out from the back just as Tone and Shade arrive. Tone then stands in front of the barbershop with 2 machine guns, slaughtering almost everyone inside. Pop is shot through the neck while Luke shields the youngster, telling him to play dead. After destroying the entire establishment, Tone and Shade survey the scene before retrieving the money Chico stole. As soon as they leave, Luke runs to Pop, who's nearing the end of his life, and sobs above him. As his final words, Pop whispers, "Always forward." Seeing him die breaks something inside Luke, and he can't play it safe any longer. In the aftermath of the shooting, The detectives investigate Pop's barbershop in a more technically inventive scene. Misty stares at Luke's ripped-up shirt and is stunned by the story of how he shielded the kid. The cops have nothing to go on as Cornell has been at the club all night. The same night, Cornell and Mariah meet Tone and Shades on the roof, where Tone explains how he went in, lit up the place, and got the money back. Even though Cornell is angry, he calms down when he muses aloud about anonymously donating to Pop so he can rebuild the shop. But the moment he learns of Pop's death, something in him unravels, and with a little foreshadowing, he throws Tone off the roof. Observing her cousin's threatened kingdom, Mariah remarks that this is not what their ancestors died for. She also claims that she wants respect, but Cornell disagrees, claiming that he wants the kind of legacy that can only be enjoyed by the living. In the next scene, Luke is standing at a distance from Mariah's building when a boy points a gun at his head from behind, addressing him as the N-word. Offended by the word, Luke turns around, takes the gun, and shoots himself, scaring the boy and causing him to flee. Luke finally realizes an important truth. Anger is a powerful fuel, and black resistance cannot exist without it. The next day, we see both Luke and Cornell in mourning as the news of Pop's death spreads. Following this, Luke heads to the mortuary to discuss a casket for Pop with the funeral home. Luke lacks the funds to cover Pop's casket, but he finds the ostentatious casket suggested by the mortician repugnant. We discover that the mortician is also the guy who disposes of bodies for Cornell. Just then, Cornell walks in, noting he'll cover everything. The two have words, and Cornell tells him that his former associate acted out of line, but isn't doing much acting anymore. Regardless, Luke believes it's still his fault. Later, Luke walks to the barber shop, where he meets Bobby Fish, a chess player who used to play with Pop. After learning of Luke's desire to keep the shop open, Fish, who also used to do Pop's taxes, claims that it would cost $80 grand to buy the shop, but that if they kept the bills paid, no one would even ask. Luke then decides to take the money from Cornell, but instead of going after him directly, he plans to take out his queen, knights, rooks, and eventually all of his pieces from the board. On the other hand, Misty and Raphael question Chico, who refuses to speak out against Cornell despite his outrage over Pop's death. Shortly after, Luke arrives and has a brief encounter with Misty, who wants to know how he's involved in all of this, but Luke refuses to reveal anything. After this, he has a one-on-one conversation with Chico, from whom he learns the inner workings of Cornell's operations. He then intends to hit the places, giving Cornell the impression that Domingo is hitting him. He finally starts to unleash absolute hell, and his intelligence makes a bigger difference than his indestructible body. Luke carefully hits Cornell's 4 stash houses, taking out guns as well as the thugs, but leaving the cash for the cops to find. This forces Cornell to reinforce Crispus Attucks and move everything there against Mariah's wishes. She is adamant about Crispus Attucks becoming a legal, low-cost housing community, which puts her at odds with Cornell. In the evening, Domingo shows up at Harlem's Paradise and confronts Cornell, telling him he knows Diamondback was behind the gun shipment and demanding his money back. Cornell claims there are no refunds and inquires whether he admits to raiding his stash houses. However, Domingo dismisses him and walks away before declaring war on the Spanish. That night, Luke is outside Mariah's office when he notices the money being moved to the Fort Knox room at Crispus Attucks. He waits for Mariah to leave before ramming his way into the building using an SUV door. He then proceeds to use the car door to beat up some of the guards before wrapping it around a guy and throwing him down the stairs. He pulls a pipe from a wall and begins beating up more men, eventually making his way to the vault. Despite taking out everyone, he only takes 1 bag of money and leaves before the police arrive. While investigating the recent shootout case, Misty has her suspect on Luke. Shortly after, Raphael receives a phone call from Chico, who wishes to speak with him. Following this, Raphael drives to a quiet road and meets Chico, who informs him of his decision to turn himself in to the police. After learning that he's given up on Cornell, Raphael out of nowhere chokes him to death with his tie. He then loads the body into his truck and heads to Harlem's Paradise. He hands Chico's body over to Cornell and further reveals that Luke has been hitting his places all day. Raphael appears to have been on Cornell's payroll the entire time. Meanwhile, Luke takes the duffel bag of money and gives it to Bobby Fish in order to keep the barbershop open. After a brief conversation, he goes to Connie's restaurant for dinner and also pays her the money he owes her. Not long after, Cornell fires a rocket gun at him from the roof across the street. Luke notices it with just enough time to get up before the entire place blows up.